Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Plentina's Showcase event, Credit Building is Nation Building, an in-depth look at credit leadership. I'm Derek Papa, and I will be your host for this afternoon event. Plentina puts itself as the lead in credit access in the Philippines. Through this event, Plentina showcases its goals in restructuring the financial ecosystem in the country. Get to know the aspirations of Plentina and its partners in building a more sustainable and accessible financial opportunities for the country, and how this innovation will ensure a redefined opportunity as we recover as a nation. Now, to start things off, let us have our first speaker. He is he was previously a computer vision researcher at NASA Ames and led data science at Plum Technologies when it was acquired by Google. After being an Android machine learning engineer, he founded a team at Google's Area 120 incubator to improve emerging market credit access. He has granted 4 patents in mobile behavioral data, and he is currently the CEO and co-founder of Plentina. He has a degree in electrical engineer from UCLA, a master's degree on electrical engineer from Stanford, and all but thesis electrical engineering PhD from Stanford. Let us welcome Kevin Gabayan.
Thanks very much, Derek, for the warm introduction. Hi, I'm Kevin. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Plentina. Plentina is a buy now, pay later service that's making credit payments more accessible in the Philippines and other emerging markets. And so my co-founder, Earl, and I met about 15 years ago, dreaming of a stronger, a better, more resilient, Philippines. So imagine a Philippines that's no longer considered a developing country, with world-class healthcare, world-class educational system, plentiful jobs, and an economy that's the envy of the world. And these are the kind of dreams that you'd expect from some naive university student to push around. And that's exactly what happened about 15 years ago at Stanford. So, Earl and I, we got all the Filipino graduate students together for regular dinners. That's how we met. And there are less than 10 of us in the school, but we challenged each other. How can we serve the Philippines? And we still do today. So, for years after our graduation, Earl and I have shared a bunch of ideas around, what can we build for the Philippines? We talked about them for over a decade. And eventually, and finally, it was time to quit our jobs and actually make it happen. So here we are. We're Plentina. This talk is called Credit Building is Nation Building. And that's because to support the dreams that we have for the Philippines, we need a strong economy. Unfortunately, cash still dominates the economy because it's largely the only way to pay for things. So whether it's paper cash or if it's digital cash, it's harder to buy or sell anything when you need to have the right amount of cash on hand at the right time. And unfortunately, most people in the Philippines don't have access to formal credit, and their purchases are limited to just the cash on hand. So whether it's money in the wallet or the balance of your digital wallet, and whether you have that money or not, you still need to make the purchases that you need to make in order to buy the essentials for your family. And some of us fall into a credit trap when they have no better option than these high-cost predatory loans. So imagine a Philippines with no predatory lending, no 5-6 lenders where everyone just has access to affordable credit. And a national credit registry like the CIC enables credit histories so that Filipinos can qualify for credit. And we need everyone on board on that. So today, it's approximately about 30% of Filipino adults that's registered in the CIC, and we can all work together to get near 100% coverage, just like other developed countries. And our approach is Plentina. We want to dramatically accelerate the adoption of credit access in emerging markets like the Philippines. And the BSP and the CIC have both supported alternative credit scoring as this amazing development in the last decade that can dramatically improve financial inclusion. Now add to alternative credit scoring the cooperation of retailers. So retailers that these are retailers that need to improve sales through the pandemic. Some of these retailers are large scale. They have transaction histories through things like loyalty programs that can contribute to alternative credit data. And consumers need this credit more than ever during the pandemic. And we need to disperse this credit responsibly to people at their appropriate risk for this to work responsibly for people. So the BSP identified in financial inclusion surveys amongst financial institutions that the hardest part about this is developing the internal expertise or the ability to estimate creditworthiness from this data. And Plentina to date has worked with many large-scale merchants and many organizations that have yet to build this internal ability, these tech teams, in order to make use of this data. So there's a lot of alternative credit data sitting there that could be used to improve people's creditworthiness, but companies lack these tech teams to drive value from that. So Plentina is working to make this data work for everyone in the Philippines and other emerging markets, so we can get plentiful access to credit data. So I'll hit the share button over here so that I can share this presentation. Introducing Plentina. So here we are, Plentina. Plentina is pay later for emerging markets, or supported by these investors to date. So thank you to everyone in support. So as mentioned, many emerging markets have low access to credit. So whether you are privileged or less privileged, it's just really hard to access credit when there's just 2% credit card penetration in countries like the Philippines. I've met and I walked around NCR, conducted hundreds of on-the-street interviews with everyday Filipinos that either you could be operating a sari-sari store and unfortunately borrowing from a 5/6 lender and paying 20% monthly interest in order to pay for your inventory, or you could be a college graduate, young professional that is the responsible friend amongst their friends that is actually lending money to friends and family, yet still doesn't qualify for a credit card when they walk into a bank. Or you could be like my co-founder, Earl, who had previously been a VP of innovation at Smart Communications. And when he walked into a bank and applied for a credit card, he still got rejected for a credit card. So whether you are privileged or not, it's just really tough to get a credit card in the Philippines, to get access to formal credit. And so this is our opportunity to make a dramatic change in access to credit. So as mentioned, 110 million people in the Philippines, only 2% have access to credit cards today, according to the Findex. And it's amazing that in the West, buy now, pay later companies such as these four, Affirm, Klarna, Afterpay, QuadPay, have built this $80 billion market value, making existing credit payments even more convenient. And we wish that we could see that kind of credit convenience in emerging markets. Not just to make it convenient, but also in some cases be people's first credit access. But these pay later companies, you can't just drop it into an emerging market like the Philippines for a number of reasons. One, you need data in order to underwrite people. In the West, you can just punch in your social security number, for instance, and then perform a hard credit check on someone in order to look up their credit history. We're still working on that piece. Also, merchants generally don't have tech teams in the Philippines in order to leverage this data in order to underwrite these loans, and also to be able to integrate payments APIs so that you can conduct like sales through these transactions. So Plentina is here to make it work, make pay later work in emerging markets for universally affordable credit. So we leverage partner data. When we make a partnership, then if a partner has data available, then we can make it work to increase credit access for the consumers and increase the credit limits. Also, merchants don't need tech teams in order to sell on credit with Plentina, because we make it work with their legacy systems. So more on that in a bit. But so Plentina is a pay later service so that large scale merchants can sell on credit to the underbanked, and that underbanked people will be able to pay later for their goods. So our MVP is an app. It's on the Play Store today. We launched it about in October 2020, and we're just thrilled about the adoption so far. So as mentioned, met my co-founder Earl, should update this slide, about 15 years ago now. So since Stanford, I left Stanford to lead data science for Bump Technologies after having been a computer vision researcher at NASA Ames. At Bump, worked on R&D projects there. We pivoted into photos because everyone was bumping photos, and Google acquired us to build Google Photos. So my patents come from Bump Technologies, from Google Photo Sharing, from Android activity recognition. Always been passionate about driving better outcomes in the Philippines. So I founded a team at Google focused on emerging market credit. And then in 2019, it was time to take a crack at an external startup, with Earl taking a new angle at this, at credit access. And Earl has, since our Stanford days, has become a bit of a rock star of the Philippine startup ecosystem. Did his engineering bachelor's at Cornell. We met at Stanford during his MBA. And since then was VP of Innovation at Smart Communications. Founded some of the Philippines' first startup incubators, Idea Space and QBO. And then went back to the United States to work as data partnerships for Bridgewater, and also was managing director of Charles Schwab in San Francisco. So very thrilled to be working with Earl and the rest of the team on this. Also happy to have a rock star set of advisors here. Just a lot of leaders from emerging market lending companies like Branch, Kiva, PayJoy, Stellar, Affirm, and a former head of credit cards and loans at Citibank, Philippines. So, Plentina works with merchants so that they can turn their loyalty programs into valuable alternative credit data. And we also leverage mobile data in order to build credit scores in order to dramatically increase that access to credit and make it affordable for them. So, leveraging these different data sources, we're able to build machine learning models that predict the risk of lending to them, of fraud, of conversions, of repayments. And also, merchants don't need tech teams to sell with Plentina. For instance, in this grocery, this is a real sign for Plentina in front of the 555 sardines here. And they don't need to integrate any payments APIs when we can generate accounts with them and transact with them a bit more manually, but it still works with them. Our customer base has grown rapidly. So just last month, we celebrated our 100,000th download and also our 120th thousandth download in the same month, both in September. So we're excited about the dramatic growth, and monthly transacting users has been somewhere between 30 and 70% growth recently. So excited about that. Average 4.6 stars on the Google Play Store. So, a bit more about the app since I haven't mentioned it. You can use the app in order to get electronic store credit with your favorite merchants. So we're building that credit history with our consumers just by enabling them to go to their favorite merchants to buy the essential goods that they normally get, and also be able to pay later for this on their own time. And then that can also build their CIC credit history. And we see this lending service as our MVP as we add more financial services to the mix. So people love the fact that we're fast and convenient, an NPS score of about 77 today. Large scale merchants have jumped on. So initial partnership with 7-Eleven Philippines, and it just went from there. We moved on to Smart Communications, Agoda, and since then, the list continues to grow. We're proud to be joined by some partners on the call today. And hey, thanks for listening in, and say hi at info@plentina.com for any questions or comments. So thanks again.
Wonderful talk on the mission of Plentina. To move forward, we will have our second speaker. He was an aerospace engineer by training before going to B school, worked in business development at tech companies such as Cisco, VMware, and EMC. He founded a startup incubator while he was vice president of the largest telecom in the Philippines, held executive role at Bridgewater and Charles Schwab, and was a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader. Has an electrical degree from Boston University, master's in systems engineering from Cornell, and an MBA from Stanford. He is the co-founder and CBO of Plentina. To provide us an introduction on the importance of credit access in the country, let us all welcome Earl Valencia.
Thanks, Derek, for that intro, and also Kevin to talk about kind of our story, right, of why we created Plentina, and a little bit of color there too. Kevin and I were brainstorming in a number of train rides in Silicon Valley, and we were thinking, like, if we wanted to change the Philippines, how do we do that? And we had many different ideas, but one glaring idea really is, how can we really help the financial sector? Because if the financial sector really grows, digitizes, that is basically a platform for every other services to grow, from retail to consumer to businesses, etc. Right? So imagine if you can revolutionize and digitize financial services for the Philippines and with the Philippines, then what can we do? Right. So, and we thought many different things too. If that's the case, do we do investments? Do we do banking? Right. But we then gravitated towards credit. And I kind of talked today about, the importance of credit to an individual, but also society. So hopefully we'll, for the next couple of minutes, I'll kind of just share my own thoughts of my own personal journey, but at the same time, um, maybe how it impacts you, kind of the audience, right, of why credit is important, right? So let me share here. So, yeah. So, what is the importance of credit access? So, this is maybe a collection of a story, all right? So, I have three stories here. The first story is, this is my dorm in college. So, I went to UP in the Philippines, and then I got a partial scholarship to go abroad to the US at Boston University to continue my engineering degree. My parents had enough to pay to top up the tuition, but didn't really have enough money to pay for my dorm. So what did I do? And I had to go to the bank and ask for a student loan in order to pay for a bed in this place, which is my former dorm in Boston, right? So that's what one story. My next story is, one of my first encounters at Amazon. So I just looked at the timeline. This was Amazon circa 2004, right? So when I was in grad school, again, I got another scholarship, but I didn't have enough money to buy these expensive books. So in grad school, the hardbound books could cost $100, but the soft bound books, but you can ship it from other places, right, maybe cost $10 to $20, and that's a way for me to survive and really save money, is to use my first credit card as an adult, to use it in an e-commerce transaction, and I thought that was kind of magical, right? So and maybe my last, what I call as my credit stories, right, is this. So this is my family, right? And 5 6 years ago, I my wife basically said, let's not always move. So before we settled in here and where I'm right now, I was told my wife will be moving every so often, maybe every 2 years or so, and she's like, I think our kids are getting bigger, we need to at least settle down and maybe buy a house. So obviously I can't afford to buy a house kind of outright. So what did I do? I went to the bank again and got a home loan, right? So, all three stories kind of revolve around one thing, right? Which is the notion of credit. It could be steady credit with regards to student loans, right? Because you need to pay for your dorm. It's maybe a credit card because you need to then pay for books, services online, right? Conveniently. And then maybe it's going to be your first house or condo or whatnot, because your family is growing and you want to settle down. right? So a lot of times we think of credit as something that's scary. Sometimes we think of credit as sometimes maybe even evil, right? But in the end of the day, I think credit has a very massive effect, a positive effect on an individual, but generally also to society, right? So I'll give you kind of 5 reasons of why credit is important to you as an individual, and maybe it's beneficial to you as well, right? So the first one is yeah, so credit in the purest sense is really a way for people to access funds that they don't have yet. So it could be a notion that there's a financial emergency, right? So maybe it's because of health reasons, maybe it's to buy food, maybe it's to bridge yourself to a payday, maybe it's for other necessities, right? So having access to credit in a specific time is very important just in case, right? So this is basically the first use case of credit to your life, right? This is, I think, what everybody thinks of what credit should be, right? And I think it's also, to be honest, a more practical sense. But then the second one is what we call as productive credit, productive loans, right? Like, can you actually use credit in order to better yourself, right? In order for you to then have potential higher earning for yourself, what wealth building, or maybe even to understand what you want to do. Let's say if you want to take a course on a new trend or a new area, then it's really a way for you to access potential knowledge to better yourself in the future. So I think this productive loan mentality is now where you realize that credit actually has a positive effect on your future, right? Um, the next one, or my third point of how credit really is important potentially to yourself and maybe even the economy, is that it really helps jumpstart or could accelerate your dreams of having a business, right? So it's very few times, and not all of us have assets, right, into our name in order for us to get, or maybe a rich uncle or rich aunt, right, to basically fund their business dream. So you might have to go to someone, get a starter loan, use that in order for you to build more of your dreams, right? So and if you already have an existing business, this is a fuel for you to actually accelerate that business. So again, credit could be used in ways that maybe if you don't have it, it'll be constrained, right, or slowed down. um, my next point here is building a strong credit profile or credit history. We'll have later, attorney Ben from the CIC. It's the notion and importance of having actually this digital history of your credit behavior, which is the foundation, could potentially unlock more and more financial services in the future. Imagine that you start out with like a small loan, like a Plentina loan, which is $2, right? And then you repay that, you get more, and then at some point you can upgrade it into larger loans, maybe a personal loan, and then maybe a credit card, and then a student loan, and then a credit card, and then basically a car loan, and then a home loan, right? And then a business loan. So imagine that the more that you are responsible and the more you build your credit profile, but starting small, how much financial services could be unlocked in the future, right? So I think having credit, and you should think about it as a positive thing, because you can then have more opportunities with your good behavior today. And then my last point for you as an individual is really, like my story, right? Like, how can you advance your goals? So credit in the simplest form is, using future, future salary to pay for something today. But then imagine that that's, important for your life, right? Like it could be a car because you need to get to work, or you just need to, have this flexibility. It could be home, it could be others, right? So credit then really builds up your goals. And so that's why it's kind of important to think about that. So my last point here, and this is kind of credit for nation building, is that I think credit as an overall macro is really notion of like a fuel for economic growth, because it increases the purchase power and more opportunities for citizens as individuals. And then if individuals have access to it, imagine if you can give that access to businesses, business access to it, then that trickle effect will then have a bigger impact into society, right? So that's kind of my thoughts here on the importance of credit. But I was trained when I was young that credit is something we have to avoid. But then when you reflect on it, and I grow older, I realize that credit could be your friend if done responsibly. So I definitely urge everyone to think about it. And I'm glad that we have now, many ways for us to build the financial credit profile or history and access to these types of especially convenient digital versions of credit. So thanks so much, and appreciate it.
Thank you so much for that introduction to credit access, Earl. It is really an eye-opening. It is really an eye-opening on how credit is important for everyone. But to give us a bigger perspective on credit culture on the country, our next speaker was appointed as a public sector director and elected by the board as president CEO of the Credit Information Corporation last November 2020. He started in government service as Security Counsel for the Enforcement and Investor Protection Department in the Securities and Exchange Commission. He eventually served as the technical and executive assistant of the Office of the SEC Chairperson and Commissioner, while concurrently functioning as the SEC Liaison Officer to the CIC. In 2019, he was designated as Public Sector Director to the CIC, together with a representative from the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas and the Insurance Commission, and while in such capacity chaired the CIC's Risk Committee. In 2015, he was awarded a full scholarship under the Japan IMF Scholarship Program for Asia, and in 2017, he acquired his master's degree in Public Policy International Program from the University of Tokyo Graduate School of Public Policy. His field of specialization and expertise spanned both enforcement and policy-making functions on such topics such as security law, competition law, economic reform policy, credit information system, and financial sector regulation. He is currently the president and CEO of Credit Information Corporation. Let us all be informed by attorney Ben Baltazar.
Thanks for that, Derek. Before I begin my presentation, I'd like to thank Kevin and Earl and the rest of the Plentina team for inviting CIC over to participate in today's roundtable with the topic that credit building is nation building. So this is a theme that's very relevant to us in the credit eco space, but even to the average borrower, because they can be kept abreast of all the innovations and developments a lot of stakeholders are doing to improve access to credit. So on to my presentation, if I can already put it on the screen. Okay, all right. So my topic for today is CIC and credit culture in the Philippines. And it'll be divided into three parts. The first part will be the stigma of credit in the Philippines. The second will be the role of CIC as the Philippine Credit Registry. And lastly, CIC's credit report and credit scoring as ways by which we can combat this stigma of credit. So the stigma of credit in the Philippines has already been touched on earlier by both Kevin and Earl, largely with the idea that access to credit or taking out a loan is something that is done under negative terms. And this concept of credit in the Philippines has really not yet reached its maturity. And this can actually be verified by the fact that a large number of our citizens still rely on informal sources of credit. The idea of credit or utang still maintains an enduring stigma in the country because it evokes negative concepts such as financial hardship, mismanagement, and vulnerability. Yet, despite this stigma, there is a paradox of the ubiquity of credit in everyday life. And the idea here is that if something is so negative or something to be ashamed of, yet it seems to kind of exist in every facet of our daily life, and that's something I'd like to elaborate on in the later slides. So once again, terms associated with utang are quite negative, such as the vicious cycle of being in debt or nabaon sa utang, the shame or nakakahiya, non-payment, which in the local vernacular is actually rather animatedly referred to as tinakbuhan or nagtago or to run away or to hide. You also have bankruptcy or the local expression na short. Of course, you have the existence of predatory neighborhood loan sharks, and I think Kevin already mentioned this earlier, 5-6, which is charging at least 20% interest rate. He was actually very kind earlier because he reckoned it on a monthly basis. But in my experience in the SEC, we've seen 5-6 loans enforced on a weekly basis. So you could just imagine how crazy the annual rate of that would be. So high interest rates, of course, poverty and collateral. So the objective of my presentation today is kind of to somehow dispel these negative notions and establish how credit is a positive thing, and how the CIC in pursuing its mandate is intent on actually converting the narrative of credit from something that's noted to be negative into something positive. So in a 2019 BSP Financial Inclusion Survey, we see that the number of Filipino adults with outstanding loans is actually a fairly high number at 41%, which actually speaks to the ubiquity that I was referring to earlier. That if credit was so negative or something to be avoided, why does it pervade in our society? And among the 41% of adults with outstanding loans, 54% of these surveyed actually said that they had their loans sourced from informal sources. So this could be relatives, informal lenders, and probably micro lenders that have a less formalistic structure. Now, a huge number of this 41%, numbering 48%, actually have a perception that there is, a lot of difficulty in securing formal sources of loans or loans from formal sources such as banks. And largely because of certain barriers such as proper documentation, an adequate salary, government IDs, and of course, credit history. And just to somehow tie up the narrative, we only have 3%, based on the survey, of Filipino adults that can confirm that they have loans from formal sources such as banks. Now, in the same survey, the uses of these loans were actually asked from borrowers, and 55% answered that they take out loans for the purpose of financing their daily needs. So this is something that Earl touched on earlier about, filling in the gap between your expenses and when your income or influx of your cash or salary comes in. In the Philippines, this is normally on the 15th and the 30th, hence the rise of the term pecha de peligro, which is, the numbers close to that 15th and 30th that you're running out of funds already. It's around those times that you might need some help by taking out consumption smoothening credit, which is what's reflected by this survey result of large majority saying that they take out credit for daily needs. 27% use it for business. Naturally, unfortunately, we are not a country with a lot of working capital on hand by entrepreneurs. A lot of business activity in the country has to be jump started by an infusion of capital. And if you cannot get that capital through equity, then you have to get that through debt, which is exactly what this percentage represents. Of course, the next in line would be education. I think Earl's anecdote about his experience abroad also speaks to the narrative in the Philippines, wherein loan generation rates or loan application rates skyrocket at around the start of every school year or semester because of this kind of a bump in a household or a person's consumption activity, wherein tuition is normally something that has to be paid either upfront or in installments in such large amounts. Because in the Philippines, education is I would say almost mandatory, well at least on the secondary level, such as high school. But even on the tertiary level, relative to our peers in the region, as much as possible, a lot of Filipino families would like to finance and fund their children's college education to ensure a better life for them. And in this situation, if they don't have enough funding on hand, then they rely on credit to be the driver of that kind of pursuit. Of course, we have medical needs, which is quite timely right now. I'm sure this has skyrocketed due to the advent of the COVID-19 virus, and it's something that cannot be accounted for. That's why you need the availability of credit in order for a loved one to get the required medical attention they need. And then after that particular treatment, which is obviously very urgent, is actually secured, then we can go about figuring out a way to properly address or pay for these kinds of expenses. Of course, we also have the tail end entries in the survey, which would be the purchase of a vehicle. This could apply to both the business side, could also apply to the, daily needs side, wherein, in a country such as the Philippines with a lot of density in urban areas and even in the rural areas, you do need to secure a vehicle to be able to conveniently commute from one point to another, whether it's your residence to your place of work, or maybe to go around places of significance such as points of business or points of travel. Of course, last is to refinance or pay other loans. So how does the CIC help break the stigma of credit and promote a healthy credit culture in the country? Well, very simply, by promoting information and risk-based lending and incentivizing borrowers and lenders to act responsibly towards their best interests. So this leads to the second segment, which is what the CIC can do as the Philippines Credit Registry. So under Republic Act 9510, known as the Credit Information System Act of 2008 or CISA, the CIC was formed as a government-owned and controlled corporation to receive and consolidate basic credit data, and in doing so, act as a central registry or central repository of credit information. And it's not just enough that we actually consolidate and collect this information, but we also have to feed this back into the credit ecosystem by providing access to reliable and standardized information on the credit history and financial condition of borrowers. The main premise behind this kind of system, which actually has existed in rather advanced forms in other countries such as the US and even Europe, is the idea that in order to efficiently allocate credit, we look at the track record of borrowers, and based on the notion of merit, we allocate credit to those that are credit worthy. And in doing so, actually lower the overall cost of credit by minimizing the chances of default, or in the case wherein credit is misallocated to bad credit risks. So as I mentioned earlier, this moves the credit allocation system from what it is right now, it's rather opaque, into something that is actually information and risk-based, precisely because of the track record that is within the CIC. So once again, the mandate of the CIC is to improve the overall availability of credit, especially to MSMEs, and provide credit at a more cost-effective rate, and of course, reduce excessive dependence on collateral. So if you don't have collateral, but you've built a rather solid credit history, then you have what we would call reputational collateral, which may dispense with the need for any kind of material collateral. So very quickly, this is a diagram of how the CIC operates. So a lender submits your basic credit information to the CIC. So this is your loan, your demographics, and your payment history. And the CIC consolidates that because you might have multiple loans from different lenders. So we need to match that to the correct borrower in order for a full 360-degree picture of a borrower's credit profile can be established. And that is fed back to the borrower, such as yourself, if you actually want to pull a credit report on the CIC, or in the case where you want to secure credit score, it is first processed through our special accessing entities or credit bureaus that we have authorized to access our data. And that those entities can actually study your data and provide you with a credit score. So this can also be done with the receiving entity to be your lender in the case where you're applying for a new loan or they're monitoring the status of your loan. So when you take both of those together, this is the unified diagram that we have, wherein the CIC is at the heart or is at the engine of this new information and risk-based credit regime. So the CIC database right now has actually quite a massive scope with 29 million unique data subjects, making it the largest and most comprehensive credit database in the country. So we span not just the banks, but even government lending institutions such as GSIS and SSS and other GFIs such as Pag-ibig, commercial and universal banks, rural and thrift banks, credit card companies, financing companies, investment houses, insurance companies, cooperatives, trust entities, and microfinance NGOs. So the mandate of the CIC is rather wide, and its breadth and scope was intended to be that wide precisely because it was intended to pursue a financial inclusionary goal. So the submitting entities in production are the ones that are actually now submitting actual data to the CIC pertaining to their borrowers. And as of October, we already have over 600 submitting entities, and we intend to grow this further and further. Now, on the access side, we have 131 accessing entities. Some of these are listed here and you may know of. And these entities are using your credit information to inform them on how they should resolve your credit applications, whether to grant it or deny it, or even extend to you more favorable terms. So I mentioned earlier that part of the credit ecosystem would be our SAEs or accredited credit bureaus. These are CIBI, CRIF, and TransUnion. And these entities harness and process our data to come up with credit scores and other value-added services such as portfolio reviews, which are intended to provide a more direct or a handy or useful manifestation of our credit information. So to the credit report and credit scoring. So just to make the distinction, the credit report is really just a consolidated basic credit information that is submitted to us by all of the submitting entities and consolidated by the CIC to ensure that it pertains to the correct borrower. On the other hand, a credit score is actually a number or a rating which kind of represents how attractive your credit behavior has been. Now, we're using a scale here that is based on the FICO system, so it's 300 to 850, and the rule is fairly simple. The higher it is, the better in terms of your credit performance. So before I move to the next slide, I do want to clarify that unlike other credit repositories, the CIC contains both negative and positive credit information. So we don't just emphasize information about defaults or past dues, but we also tabulate and collect all on-time payments of borrowers. So as I mentioned earlier, the higher credit score, the better. And because of this system, we take the guesswork out of credit decisioning. Credit reports are used by your lenders to assess whether or not loans should be granted on your behalf. And it provides a balanced view of an individual's creditworthiness because it contains both positive and negative credit information, which builds towards your reputational collateral. And of course, if you have any problems with your credit information, you have a right under the CISA to have these corrected through our process called the ODRP, or the Online Dispute Resolution Process. You can check out our website for more information. So lastly, the credit report and credit scoring system that the CIC is trying to advocate in the Philippines is contingent on having a reliable and comprehensive centralized credit information that reflects the credit history of borrowers. So aside from actually operating and setting up the system, we do have our financial education arm through our webinar series, the CIC Academy, which also is intended to educate borrowers on how to use CIC credit reports, discuss how we can express responsible borrowing, and lastly, to inform them of the rights and remedies as borrowers. So I'll end my presentation here, and thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Attorney, for giving us a clear perspective on our country's culture towards credit. But on the other hand, credit needs basic purchases in order for the whole process to work. Luckily, we have our last speaker for today. His experience includes 12 years Silicon Valley executive leadership experience, and he recently moved to the Philippines to raise the bar of the local tech industry. While in Silicon Valley, he grew a $16 million plus division for Salesforce, started two divisions for and was part of the IPO with Cornerstone On Demand. Prior to leaving San Francisco Bay Area for Manila, he was the North American Vice President for Sales for Zero Small Businesses cloud accounting software. Today, he's the founder and CEO of Prosperna.com. What Prosperna's mission is to empower 100,000 SMEs in the Philippines with easy to use and affordable e commerce software. To enlighten us on e commerce as the drive to innovation, let us welcome Dennis Velasco.
Yeah, hey everybody, and hey Derek. Thanks for having me, and super excited to talk about this very important combination of how e-commerce and credit can really drive and fuel innovation and really change, in my opinion, the Philippine economy forever. Starting today in the next 10 years. So super excited about that. And I do want to say thanks for having me as a part of your panel today, because it really has been a true blessing and honor. After spending 12 plus years in Silicon Valley, helping build some of the fastest growing companies, I often traveled to the Philippines and just saw, how technology could potentially make a positive impact on our country. And so really that's what's led us today here at Prosperna, on a huge mission. And, that mission is to empower 100,000, MSMEs here in our country with simple and affordable e-commerce software. So, to really round out and shape our conversation, I've prepared a few key topics that I believe are important parts of fueling this innovation between e-commerce and credit. And so what I'd like to share with everybody is, first off, some of what we see are the top 6 e-commerce trends, but these trends are really more on the consumer side. And then we can shift gears and talk about 2 of the biggest trends or things to look out for when it comes to the merchant side and how merchants should consider what's happening in the technology, e-commerce, and credit ecosystem. And of course, I think it's also helpful to maybe share some success stories and just talk a little bit about where Prosperna plays a role in this whole journey. So let's focus first on the top 6 e-commerce trends and really start on the consumer side, because we believe that every company should really be a customer or consumer first driven company. And if you follow, watch, observe, and really are there to serve your consumer, it'll really help you very, very much simplify your approach on how to adapt technology, how to adapt financial and technology, alternative solutions and services. So here's what we're seeing. Obviously, first, consumers were prevented from going back to the traditional retail. And, we saw a massive decline of over 70% lower foot traffic in some of the traditional retail establishments. And that, obviously made a immense negative impact because traditional merchants were not prepared. And if you don't mind me saying, we were probably 10 or 15 years behind when it comes to adopting, e-commerce technologies. And so that really prevented consumers from getting what they need, just even from a basic essential standpoint, right? Now, if you look at the consumer demographic here in the Philippines, where a lot of the big opportunity is in the very, very young and tech savvy age of the Philippine, landscape. So with the average age of Filipinos being 25 years old, this demographic basically grew up around technology. They grew up, wanting things faster and having access to information right there in their fingertips. And, when you break down the other demographics of Filipino consumers, here's some other interesting facts. millennials, 82% of them prefer to shop online. And when you look broader, the Gen Z, over 57% of them also prefer to use e-commerce. And even Gen Xers, they cite that 3/4 of the reason why they want to shop online is because they find better and more selection when looking online. So, here are a few points that immediately, and these are straight data points that immediately can help you shape how to use e-commerce and alternative financial services. When you look at the basic essentials, that's really where the tip of the spear or the first move is in adapting e-commerce and alternative payments and credit solutions. So just look at the food delivery industry. Just last year alone, there's 183% growth, and companies like Food Panda and Grab Food really taking the majority of that market share. Because obviously, everybody's got to eat. And here in the Philippines, we've got that awesome food culture here that is really unchallenged, in my opinion, around the world. Now, let's break it down further, right? You look at the demographics, you look at the change in traditional retail, right? And you look at the consumer buying behavior on the basic essentials. So where does financial services and the credit options come into play? Well, let's take a look at some of these key metrics. Some studies show that less than 3% of the Philippine population have a credit card. And there are research reports that as much as 77% of our Philippine population is still unbanked, right? But again, keep in mind, right? Life goes on. The basic necessities still need to be purchased, right? And so in order to purchase the basic necessities, like we saw, in the growth of online food delivery, 25 million people in the Philippines, right? Across over 110, 120 million people, 25 million people, which is a very substantial number, are using digital wallets. And that's just in 2020. And it's projected that in 2025, over 76 million people will be using digital wallets. And so that is really just the beginning of alternative methods of using financial services and credit to make the world continue to go round, right? So when it comes now to the e-commerce side, here's the other interesting opportunity for brands and merchants out there. There's this concept of direct to consumer or D2C, and we're seeing a really strong growth even here in the Philippines of almost 20% month over month growth of where consumers prefer to buy directly from the brand themselves, right? Well, let's face it, we're all consumers here, right? And who doesn't want a better quality experience? Well, reports show that 61% of the people prefer a better consumer experience, right? Who doesn't want to maybe save a little money and maybe get a discount? And studies show that buying direct, can give better discounts to products and services, right? Because those suppliers and merchants and brands are in much more full control of their product and pricing, right? And then, of course, being a consumer, we all know the power of media and the power of brand. And 51% of consumers out there prefer to buy from brands that they actually have a personal connection with, right? So you're going to start to see all 6 of these, massive moving trends really collide, to create the future of retail with credit and e-commerce right, behind it as a part of the foundation for this innovation. So, a lot of people ask me, will we ever go back to normal? And, I just like to point out very simple and basic things that, we all see and that we can all assimilate to. And so let me ask you, would anybody prefer to go back to DVDs versus Netflix? Probably not. If I was to ask you, could I trade your wonderful smart device or smartphone, for an old flip phone? I would say your answer is probably going to be no. And let's face it, I don't think we could ever find a traditional map anymore at at a retail store or at a gas station, right? This day and age, I don't think there's any turning back, because as humans, we only move forward. And so, what about the other side, right? Now that we've established what's happening on the consumer side, what's happening on the brand and the merchant side? So this is where it really gets interesting when you start to really break down and try to understand where e-commerce, and alternative credit and payment options come into play. Let's take a look. As a merchant and a brand, I think there's two major considerations when it comes to should you adopt, e-commerce, should you adopt, alternative credit payment options, and when you should adopt these and why, right? The first thing is, let's take a look and explore e-commerce as an adoption model, right? How do other regions, how do other economies, how have they adapted e-commerce, and what can we learn from it, right? The second main consideration is the e-commerce market maturity, right? Believe it or not, I believe that like Lazada and Shopee were first introduced to the Philippines around 2012 and 2014, right? So e-commerce isn't new. It's just evolving and changing rapidly and becoming more accessible. So let's drill down. So when it comes to the e-commerce adoption model, here's some things that merchants are thinking about every day. And the first thing is, are they ready? Is their business, is their organization, is their team, is their small business, are they personally ready, right? So what do Philippine MSMEs know or don't know, right? So there's a big education component happening around credit and around e-commerce. And then second, what resources do Philippine MSMEs have, or what resources do they not have? And where can they go for help? And then what kind of support and help can we give them, or can they get, right, to help their team or to help their business? And then, of course, do organizations have, the strategic and tactical ability to actually execute and create an e-commerce business, to create a scenario where they can offer their products and services to everybody by offering alternative payment options. The second thing around e-commerce adoption is external readiness. So the first is an inward view. What can a Philippine MSME think about when they look at themselves in the mirror and go, am I ready? Beyond that, brands and merchants here in the Philippines are also looking outside, right, externally, and they're asking themselves, well, are consumers ready? What are the customer market forces? And I just shared with you all, 6 massively and rapidly moving consumer trends that are driving business today, right? And what are the competitive market forces? Are my competitors adopting e-commerce and alternative credit payment options? And if so, is my business, is my Philippine MSME, is my brand going to evolve and adapt, or will I be left behind, right? So in addition, other external forces to consider are also, what about my suppliers and my partners? Is everybody around me that I'm doing business adopting these alternative technologies? And then here's the big question that we probably won't have enough time to tackle, but how is the government promoting and supporting and regulating this entirely massive growing ecosystem of credit and e-commerce? So those are a couple things on the e-commerce adoption that are rapidly happening, and I guarantee you every Philippine MSME and brand is thinking about. So now let's shift gears and take a look at what can the Philippine economy and MSMEs and what can we learn about the adoption of e-commerce? We talked a little bit about organizational readiness. We talked a little bit about external readiness. What happens next is people start trying. They give it a try, and that's where the initial adoption comes in. And then over time, we start to see institutionalized success stories, just how Netflix has basically eliminated, people from buying and selling DVDs at Green Hills. Just how smartphones have disrupted older phone and flip phone technologies. It's all become, everyday behavior for our world in the Philippines. And the same thing will happen with e-commerce and alternative payment and credit options. So let's look at the e-commerce market maturity. Where do things start? Well, here it is. First, we see this early phase, and we call this the crawl phase, where the majority of the market is really, bound by offline sales. And as we saw here in the Philippines, especially for brands and merchants to access customers across 7,000 islands, right? We see a lot of a reseller market, right? And then, of course, we saw the early phases of e-commerce, as mentioned before, where Lazada was created in 2012, Zalora was created in 2012, and Shopee was created in 2015. Very early signs of e-commerce. So e-commerce has actually been around here in the Philippines. But what happens next? There's an absolute next step to e-commerce. So that's the walk phase. So we go from crawl to walk, right? That's where we start to see niche marketplaces and social media selling, right? So let's look at the time frame, right? Grab Food was established in 2018. The Facebook shop entered the Philippines in 2016. Food Panda entered the Philippines in 2014. So now you start to see niche vertical industries and products and services now start to adapt marketplace selling and social media selling. And then all of a sudden things start to really accelerate, right? Where we start to really run and then move to flying mode. So this is, if we look at the run stage, that's where you have a whole ecosystem of enablement, where there are companies like e-taily that are helping, big brands that might not have the people, process, and technology, and just say, hey, we'll do the whole thing for you end to end. Or you have Prosperna and our My Store platform going, hey, you don't only want to sell on marketplaces, but you also want to sell direct to consumer, right? And then, of course, both My Store and Prosperna and e-taily, we all need the other ancillary services, the supporting services like payments, credit, shipping, all those things. This ecosystem is building and forming around us, and it's now starting to rapidly accelerate and run as the e-commerce market begins to show early signs of maturity. And then I think what we're going to see in the future is where, and we're starting to see this already, where merchants and brands want to sell their products and services everywhere. And that's what we call omni-channel. And that's where Prosperna and the My Store platform combined with our MyChat platform allows Philippine MSMEs powered by alternative payments like Plentina and shipping partners like Lalamove sell to customers everywhere, whether it's Shopee, Lazada, Facebook, on their own online store, through WhatsApp, Viber, and Instagram. And, that's just normal, right? This is what's happened in other regions. And let's face it, if you look at around, this is what's happening here in the Philippines as well. So here's a few success stories. We've got Cookie Dude, which was a pandemic business. They started out of their home and are selling just the best, crunchy on the outside and gooey on the inside cookies straight from their home. We've got Mayumi Organics, which is a homemade a business that started 7 years ago and was an early adopter into e-commerce. selling multi-channel now, across many platforms to reach their audience. And then, of course, the famous Lola Nena's, triple cheese donuts, selling thousands of essentials, but sweets online to their consumers. And there's not even just the micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, but even the large enterprises selling high value, high ticket items like genuine jewelry, genuine gold, silver, and diamonds online, like our customer Cebuana jewelry. Even selling online, thousands of these high value products. So those are a few success stories that I think will help people assimilate to what's happening around them. And so where does Prosperna come into play? Our goal, as mentioned, is to make e-commerce accessible to everyone, and we're doing that by our no-code platform, so that merchants and brands can have their own brand.com online store, sell through social media channels, offer alternative payments, and easily ship their products to their customers. And this is just a quick example of what it looks like, and we're just making it extremely affordable so that merchants can thrive and grow their business without any setup fees, without any monthly fees. And the best part about it is we're here and 300% focused on providing local support on our journey to empower 100,000 Philippine MSMEs. So, Derek, thanks again for this opportunity. I hope that these insights were helpful, and I look forward to connecting with you and the entire Plentina and Philippine MSME ecosystem in the future.
Thank you so much, Sir Dennis, for informing us on the innovations of e-commerce. That wraps up our line of speakers for today. But before we move on to our panel discussion, let us hear the General Manager of Plentina to give us the current milestones and implications of Plentina. From Alex Capullo. Alex, take it away.
Thanks, Derek. And I think for Plentina, with us, just having turned 1 year old in the Philippines, a lot has happened over the 12-month span, and we're quite happy to share that when starting out, we started with a few partner merchants, and now I think we've got over 15 in our roster. Part of them is National Bookstore, as we continue our advocacy to provide our customers the things that they need. I mean, things have just gotten much faster for us as we head into the later stages of 2021, and we're quite excited to see what 2022 has in order for us. I mean, to give you a quick snapshot, in the last quarter, we've gone from about 4,000 loans a month to now averaging 8,000 loans a month, and we've seen an influx of customers on a weekly basis signing up to Plentina, and I think we can attribute that really to three things. The wider network of merchants that we've been able to partner with and provide our customers with the things that they need, continuously improving our customers' experience, especially taking into account the feedback that they provide us. We're really appreciative of it when they say something's good, something's bad, something needs improvement, and we take that to heart in a very customer-centric culture. And in line with that, lastly, is the fact that we focus on trying to maintain this very good service, a relationship that we have with our customers so far as we scale much faster. It's something that's very important to us, especially in the industry that we play in. We want to stand out as a financial service that the average Filipino or our customers in Plentina see in a very positive and friendly way.
Thank you, Alex, for giving us Plentina's milestones. Based on our earlier talks, we've heard Plentina's mission, credit access, e-commerce, and now let us move to our panel discussion. We've gathered some of our best questions for our speakers to answer and give their thoughts to. We will once again have Kevin Gabayan, Alex Capulong, Attorney Ben Baltazar of CIC, Dennis Velasco of Prosperda, and we have a special guest for this panel discussion. She's the Managing Director of National Bookstore, the Philippines' biggest bookstore chain with over 230 branches and over 1,800 employees. With her degree in Management Engineering from Ateneo de Manila, an MBA from Kellogg Graduate School of Management, Northwestern University. She oversees the entire bookstore operations. She spearheaded the implementation of an enterprise planning software and established the NBS's delivery hotline and e-commerce site. She continues to lead National Bookstore's transformation and retail innovation to meet every Filipino's passions for education, productivity, creativity, and self-expression. Let's welcome Ms. Andrea Ramos Padilla. Again, welcome to everyone, and thank you so much for participating in this showcase event. We move on to our panel discussion, and just feel free to answer if the question is very related to your industry. So our first question, what are the biggest challenges the Philippines is facing when it comes to credit building, and how is your institution solving this problem? Maybe we
Yeah, thank you, Derek. So yeah, I guess I touched on a few of these points on the introduction talk there, but we at Plentina we see a couple large challenges in the Philippines. There is the creditworthiness data and the technical readiness in order to deploy those credit systems. So on the data side, then we partner with large-scale merchants. So we can help them leverage the alternative credit data that's just sitting there, unfortunately, so that we can use the tech teams that we have at Plentina in order to help them leverage that in order to improve their sales, which comes at an important time for the Philippines and the world, really. And then also on the technical readiness side, then merchants that have yet to make their digital transformation and form a technical team, which are increasingly hard to find these days. We can help them be able to conduct credit transactions, so they don't need a tech team in order to do so by working with their legacy systems. So that's Plentina's angle, using machine learning and partnerships to improve creditworthiness of the country.
Okay. For CIC, what we've been doing has been kind of keeping an eye on the submitting entities, which are entry points or gateways to formal credit. So that's why we're very keen on this engagement with Plentina, because I think they would probably fall under the category of microloans. So we've actually spoken to cooperatives, we've spoken to micro lending associations, and in the case of Plentina, they're quite unique in the sense that they are operating microloans, but more with a technology identity. So the idea there is that once we've established a borrower's credit history through these microloan entry points, and they are captured in our database, that will actually allow them to build their credit and unlock more credit opportunities from bigger creditors or lenders, such as banks, and even, I guess, open up higher amounts in case they want to pursue business loans. So that's one of our strategies, and we hope to carry this forward into the coming year.
Okay, like in the case of National Bookstore, most of our sales pre-pandemic was largely done by cash payments. But with the lack of credit penetration in the country, some people might be prevented from buying their school supplies and books needs when they need it. So it's great to partner with such a company, a fintech company as Plentina, because now they can buy now and pay later. Pay later when their cash flow allows them to do so. So this facility really wasn't available before if you didn't have a credit card or other access to credit. So it allows us to help our customers still continue to support their kids' education or their you know create get supplies for their productivity at home, when they need it. So this is really a big help, and we hope that we can, you know, start to educate consumers on how to use these credit facilities in a responsible way, as you said.
Yeah.
Very well said.
Yeah, and Derek, I'm curious what some of the other folks are experiencing, but it seems to me like one of the most simplest challenges that both consumers and merchants face is really if you don't mind me saying, the bureaucracy of what it takes to really sign up to get an identification, to properly, identify that, Dennis Velasco, here in Las Piñas is different than the Dennis Velasco in Pasig, right? And then, I think there's some challenges, as was mentioned by Attorney Baltazar about sharing uh, data or making data more accessible so that merchants can, safely offer alternative payment and credit options to consumers, because it's really important that we empower consumers of all types to productively use the financial means that they have in order to create a better economy and society. Just like Zandra was mentioning about education, we've got to fuel them, right? And so here at Prosperna, we're really more on the empowerment of the e-commerce platform side. So what we do is we help merchants of all sizes be able to market and sell their products on their own online store. But since there's such a low penetration on traditional, financial services, they can actually offer financial services that are really fit for the Philippines, perhaps alternative payment options, right? So now we start to create this entire cycle of merchants and consumers really being able to transact so that life can continue to evolve. I don't know. That's just what we see.
And it's
Yeah,
it's very interesting that you mentioned that, Dennis. 'Cause one of the things that we've seen at Plentina is just that, a lot of people, when we came into this market, they complain about that, exactly that. Like, there's a million Dennis Velasquez in the Philippines, or maybe, like probably it's 10 of me. How do you know it's me? And that's one of the things that when we started operations last year, we learned pretty quickly, and that's, I guess, in a real sense, what it means that we're using technology and we leverage our machine learning to help determine this much faster than usual. And because if you're Dennis Velasco in Pasig, you don't care if there's a Dennis Velasco in Parañaque. You're telling us I'm Dennis Velasco in Pasig, and it's up to you to determine that I am that one. And we leverage as much technology as we can to believe and verify that as quickly as possible, so you can go about your day and get the credit that you need. Because you're not coming to us to prove you're Dennis Velasco. You're coming to us because you need the credit.
That's right. And no, I'm really glad that you brought that up, Alex, because here at Prosperna, we really believe that the next 10 years of our country could dramatically improve from an economic and socioeconomic standpoint, because it is no secret that technology is the game changer, right? It's already proven to make companies and just the way we live every day a lot more efficient, right? And for companies, I imagine like National Bookstore, these types of technologies just help them access, more customers, right? And of course, gives the opportunity for customers to access what they need. So I love that.
I think
Derek?
yeah, very well said to our panel. But I noticed that there have been a lot of mentions on retail businesses and merchants. On this note, what do you think is the role and importance of retail businesses in credit building, along with how will retail partnerships would fintech organizations be beneficial for our country? I think this is very well suited to both Prosperity and National Bookstore.
Mrs. Andrew, I'll let you take the floor first.
Sorry, can you explain your question again?
Okay. So what is the role and importance of retail businesses in credit building for Filipinos, along with retail partnerships with fintech organizations, be beneficial for our country?
Well, would really like consumers to be able to make their purchases when they need it to fuel the economy, right? So, consumer spending, and sometimes there's a mismatch of when your funds are available and when you need it. Like for example, in our case, the big purchase is usually during the first day of school or the first week of school when the teacher gives you all the requirements, or maybe just the weekend before the first day of school. But it's kind of a bulk purchase, and sometimes it doesn't fall exactly when you have the cash. So, in order to but your kid has to go to school with his notebooks, etc. He can't go to school without his books and textbooks and notebooks and pens. um uh, you know Learning must continue, and each school year ideally they would like to freshen up their supplies. So as I mentioned earlier, the fintech solutions such as Plentina allow consumers to spend when they need it, when their kid needs it. So kids
Yeah.
don't have to go to school empty handed, and they're encouraged to continue their education, or they don't have to stop school because they can't buy the additional supplies the school may require them to bring. Or, sometimes it's hard to keep learning if you don't have the materials. So parents would like to support them by um, providing them. Basically, parents would like to buy their children everything that they would need to do well in school, because doing well in school means they would do well in the future. So
Definitely. Yeah, these are all essential purchases that
yes,
we
school
all need to
supplies
keep
are
moving.
essentials. So are books, and just to um, so fintech solutions such as this would help. Just as you uh, as was explained earlier about credit, it helps us to just keep things going, you know, tide you over until the next salary, perhaps, or just spread out your cash flow needs so that you can still provide what you need to provide to your kids. Or maybe there's a big purchase like a calculator or other materials. You can do that and then spread out the cash payments later on. So that's how credit would help in fueling the economy. But providing solutions to consumers and teaching them about it would um, help them continue with the purchases that they need.
Yeah, that's what I love
Definitely.
about having you on our panel here, Zandra, because education, like Kevin said, is absolutely a basic essential and human right. And I think that's the power of financial technology, really, to make you know spending power accessible to everyone, right? And that's what I love about CIC, because the one thing that I saw, after moving, to the Philippines, is just the silos of consumer data that nobody wants to share, and that's where I think also the power of private companies and the private marketplaces and the startups play a big role to unlock and rethink how data and access to financial services can really change an economy. right? In terms of Derek, what you mentioned around, what needs to maybe change in the merchant and retail environment, here at Prosperna, we've been growing north of 264% year over year. And that growth shows that more and more merchants are adapting the ability to sell their products and services online, using online store platforms like ours. And what we're starting to see right after that is an immediate shift in retail policies, right? So Derek and folks, if we really break that down into the very basics, when you sell online, there's something that's called like a store policy or a payment policy or a refund policy. And we're seeing more and more merchants promote more or not offer anything except for alternative financial technology modes of payment, right? So they don't even like credit cards, even if they can accept credit cards online. Well, the question is why? Because alternative financial technology solutions, from a merchant standpoint, they offer a faster approach to be able to get the money into their account, right? The settlement period for credit cards is, quite lengthy and long, and it's actually one of the higher in transaction fees, right? So merchants get this real quick. So I don't know about you all, but even at the traditional retailers, because I don't carry cash anymore, right? And I don't think a whole lot of people do either. And the last thing a retailer wants to do is, get dinged for high transaction fees and then have to wait for their money, right, after they've already given the product, right? And with financial technology services, they get their money faster with lower fees. It's just that basic. So store policies, payment policies, and all those things, merchants and retailers have to start looking at those, and they can start shaping, how they buy and sell products online. That's what we're seeing.
Derek, can I chime in very quickly?
Yes, go ahead, sir.
Yeah. So the original question was, how does online payment data play into credit? And the answer to that really is it actually breaks this chicken and egg problem that we've experienced in the credit sector, which is how do you get a loan? They look at your history paying a previous loan. So if you don't have a loan, how can you actually get a new loan? So this is similar to what we see in other fields. Like in order to get a job, you have to get job experience, or if you want to get a visa, they have to see that you've actually visited that country. So in order to break that chicken and egg problem, we have to look at alternative data, and I guess that's really best exemplified by online shopping or online payments behavior, because the idea there is that people don't just rely on formal loans as a way to reflect their full financial activity. As the 2019 BSP Financial Inclusion Survey bears out, majority of individuals in the Philippines have informal sources of loans. So these won't be counted for purposes of checking if they are credit worthy based on traditional credit data, such as repayments on actual loans um, allocated by submitting entities to CIC. So while we are trying to expand that to cover even smaller lenders, we are trying to complement that by actually adopting a more open approach with respect to the use of information. So we don't actually prohibit users of our data to combine it with other sources, as what Dennis was saying earlier about, you have a lot of these siloed consumer information. We don't have a problem of using our information to complement that. And the whole goal is that once they actually establish an entry point into formal credit records, such as like allowing them to level up and upgrade to, let's say, a formal bank as their lender, then we actually encourage that kind of behavior so that they can escalate their lending activity from something small, which is what Plentina is doing, to perhaps scale it up to something bigger, such as a traditional universal or commercial bank. So that's, I think, what is the vital importance of this missing element of online shopping activity as a way to bridge that gap. Thank you.
Yes, thanks for that, Ben. Yes, previously the only place that you can build your credit is with the bank, and with alternative credit data, then we are enabling retailers to be that way that people can build their credit by living their life, by buying their essentials, going to places like National Bookstore, and making those purchases. Just making those purchases on credit, so they can build their digital footprint and be able to qualify for loans in the future because they've been able to pay through credit payments with a large network of retailers. So yes, definitely solving the chicken and egg problem, where you don't need a loan in order to get a loan. You just need to make at least small affordable payments in order to build that alternative credit data. So thanks, Ben.
So let me piggyback on that, if you guys don't mind. So Kevin, Ben, like what's the thought of making credit data or portable as a consumer, so that I can own and take control, right, of my data? I'm curious, what do you see in those aspects?
Yeah, we see a lot of opportunities. So just a couple of weeks ago, Ben, had a talk with the BSP as well that outlines in one slide the way forward. Some of the principles that are going to be important to growing credit access in the future. Data portability is one of those pillars as well. The BSP has the Open Finance Framework that it just announced earlier this year, where data portability is an important part of that. Where if we can standardize ways that financial institutions can store transaction history for their consumers, and that can be used for multiple financial institutions in order to qualify more people for credit, then we don't have a cold start problem with every consumer, every borrower that wants to get access to credit. And the CIC is an important part of that as well. Today they are they are portable data that many accessing entities can use in order to avoid the cold start problem. And so Plentina is happy to work with these forward-looking organizations on ways that we can make data even more portable. As a fintech, then we get all kinds of requests from folks on how they can make their Plentina credit history something that they can share with people as well. And so we're excited to be working with more institutions on ways to make that more open and more accessible. So
That would be awesome.
stay tuned.
Yeah, that would be awesome. I think the key underlying word for me is empowerment and making it easy for consumers, right? And we've just got to give them those tools so that they can control and manage and really take that proud ownership of their of their standing. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
Hopefully
Well,
sooner than later.
yeah. Well, if I can chime in very quickly. So definitely, we are aligned with what Dennis is saying about empowering our borrowers to take ownership and really maximize the use of their credit information. On the concept that they can leverage on their reputational collateral to unlock financial opportunities. And at the basic level, right now, you can actually access your credit report. It's currently being offered by one of our SAEs through a consumer platform called MyScore from CIBI. But we've actually already authorized two of the others to start and roll out their consumer facing access portals, because I think both of them right now are more focused on um, drawing business from the lenders, such as the banks. So the goal really is for everyone to be more credit conscious and knowing that if their credit history is being tracked, then they would act more responsibly And this is intended to really avoid a lot of the problems we've been observing right now in the market, such as abusive collection practices, etc. So the idea here is that if we're going to have a more meritorious credit culture, then to underpin that, we need to start tracking and allowing credit information to be accessible by the borrowers so that they can use it for whatever purpose they see fit.
That's cool.
Very well said. So for our next question, how can fintechs and e-commerce companies solve credit building needs of the country, just like similar to FICO experience? And what are your initiatives in your industry to assist and conduct sorry in assisting our country in its current recovery?
Maybe I can jumpstart on that one. So, I've been uh, very blessed with over 12 years of working in the what we call the software as a service industry. And no matter if you're fintech or e-commerce software, what software as a service does is it makes technology more affordable and easier for people to consume. And so even though we are an e-commerce platform, I think if we look at that basic premise, what needs to happen is we need to make technologies like this fit and affordable and easy for the Philippine market and industry and how we do business here. Let me give you an example, Derek. Not sure if you know this or if you remember this a couple years ago, but I don't think anybody's seen a traditional movie at their old movie house lately. But if you were to go see a movie, the average movie ticket, and by all means, I love watching movies, in the old traditional movie theater. But let's just take a look at it as a case in point. A single movie would cost you 250 pesos per person to watch one movie, right? And I'm sure a lot of people have been spending a lot of time on Netflix. But if you compare the technology and distribution of movies on a platform like Netflix, where it's 149 pesos per month for unlimited access, maybe too much access to movies, right? That is a very simple example of whether you're e-commerce software or fintech services. Really, to me, that's what we're doing is making technology affordable and easy for everyone.
Very well said, Dennis. Anything else from our panel?
Oh, I'll chime in again, Derek. So I think the CIC can probably provide more information towards the last part of that question, which is, what are the contributions of the CIC in assisting the country towards its current recovery. So, I mean, the Philippines is no exception to the rest of the world. We've all been hit economically because of the COVID-19 virus, and I think a sector that's been, you know, bearing the brunt of this business interruption have been MSMEs. So it's no secret that a lot of our MSMEs are in the tourism sector and they're reeling right now because of all the lockdowns and travel restrictions. Thankfully, I've read news this week that we're slowly opening up. But this was one of those cases wherein they're particularly vulnerable right now, and that's where credit comes in, whether it's on commercial terms or on aid terms. The availability of credit and the distribution of credit, keeping in mind their pre-COVID track record, I think is something that's going to allow them to bounce back faster than, as I said earlier, than guessing if these businesses were actually viable to begin with. So the idea there is that having an information and risk-based lending regime, even in the context of a pandemic, would lead to faster bounce back because of a more efficient way of allocating credit. And sadly, some of these MSMEs um, probably don't even have formal sources of lending. So we do have engagements with other fintechs that are catering to financing MSMEs, some on something called invoice financing. And the goal really is for all of our MSMEs to have visibility in the credit information system so that we can track their payments activity, not just to maintain their current level of operations, but even to allow them to scale up. And if in some distant future another catastrophe happens, then they can rest easier knowing that based on their activity and based on merit, they will still have access to much needed credit to get them to bounce back. So that's really the goal of CIC this past year and even moving forward.
Well, and I'll just chime in here following on Attorney Ben's topic there on giving access to credit from the MSME side all the way down to the small micro consumer side. What we at Plentina do, right? And I think the most concrete, easy way to explain is we help people get the best sense of normalcy that they can in times like these, right? That's why we work with needs partners like National Bookstore and 7-Eleven, so that we give the people the things that they need, especially in these difficult times. And yeah, that's, I guess, the simplest way to explain what we do.
Okay, thank you so much. Now for our last question. For in one sentence, how can we further advance credit culture in the country? Okay, Lydia, you may go first.
I guess Kevin might have his own thoughts as well on this one. But I guess for us, in terms of credit culture, because I've been here in the Philippines for so long, and it's been mentioned over and over. I think all of us here have had experiences from coming from perspectives in other countries. And one thing I can definitely say that could help us in the Philippines is trying to remove that stigma of a taboo, where it's not necessarily evil. I mean, credit is a tool. All of us here have had experiences where it's done us good. In some instances, it may have done us bad, but it's a tool, and it's what we make out of it. It's not bad in and of itself. And I think that's something that we need to understand better, is how to make proper use of that tool. Because even something as benign as a kitchen knife or a screwdriver can do bad things if used wrong.
Okay.
Definitely. And yeah, so agreeing with that, and in one sentence, promoting responsible credit education through responsible and affordable credit payments. So I met my I took out a very large loan in order to go to graduate school where I met my wife. So I think I have a good return on the investment.
That's really good. Okay, Miss Andrea.
Well, we during this pandemic, we've established new sales channel with several O2O partners like Food Panda, Grocery, Metromart, Mall Dash, and SM Online. We also offer text to order and just to be where customers are at. And then we also expanded payment methods available in our branches, which of course includes Plentina. So offering these alternatives to payment and bridging the gap, you know, like it's I guess it's not the last mile, but one of the miles in the customer journey, the payment system. By offering credit options like Plentina, we are advancing the credit culture of the country and allowing consumers to continue their lifestyle because many of our customers who are affected by the pandemic have been forced to reprioritize their budget. But of course, we don't want to compromise our children's education.
Okay.
So I
Very
mean,
well
just
said,
this
ma'am.
option is buy now and pay later is a good option for parents. So uh, it will help us fuel the economy.
Yeah. It's really a big advocacy for National Bookstore. Any follow-up, Sir Dennis from Prosperna?
Yeah, I would just say, we highly encourage everyone to use the power of technology. I mean, it is the biggest game changer for our country. And it's a lot easier. And if you do so, you can leverage credit and accelerate and access new markets, and really come out of of any scenario on top.
Okay. And lastly, Attorney Ben from CIC.
Okay, I'll keep within the requirement of making it one sentence, but it'll be a little bit long. So, changing the credit culture in the country will require moving towards an information and risk based lending regime as represented by a public credit information system that is being promoted and operated by the CIC. Moreover, we need to implement these measures in a user friendly and inclusive approach in order to gain scale and also appeal to the credit invisible and underserved. So that's it. That's all. So one sentence. Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much, speakers, for this very wonderful panel discussion. That concludes our panel discussion, which brings us to the end of Plentina's showcase event. We thank our speakers for participating in this event. And for further details about Plentina, you may visit our online booth, open for the whole Philippine Startup Week. Thank you, and we look forward to unlocking your potential. Have a good day.